Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Chris Shang, and today we have Eric Youngstrom, who is the founder and CEO of Onramp Funds. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Tell us a little bit about Onramp, what you guys do, what's the elevator pitch, and what kind of companies you guys work with.
Sure, we're a working capital provider to e-commerce small business owners, which is kind of an elaborate way of saying we provide credit to help make sure that small e-commerce businesses have the money in hand to buy their inventory, to pay for the advertising that sells that inventory, and then to pay the shipping and fulfillment expenses to convert that digital order into a delivery of a product that delights their customer. That working capital and cash conversion problem, right, is a very difficult one, and it's a traditionally underserved market. And unfortunately, it's a market that actually doesn't really have eligibility to work with venture capitalists or other types of investors who would usually give, usually that would be an equity raise, right, to go fund those types of expenses. And so we kind of bridge that gap and work with, people who are at their first kind of $3,000, $5,000 in monthly recurring revenue, up to businesses that are $20, $30 million a year in revenue. And we're really just trying to build a software solution that optimizes and identifies when you need capital specifically to get that next big batch of inventory in, how you should pay that capital down to make sure that when you need to order the next batch of inventory, that your line is available and that you can rinse and repeat that process. And we help merchants save money because, we're acting as essentially a CFO until they're big enough that they can go afford to bring somebody in full time and help them save money by going to a bank and start working at the bank with a lower cost of capital. But you're paying for that CFO to do that work then for you.
Yep, got it. And before we kind of dive into, Onramp and how you came up with the idea and then started building out that business, I see that you've, done quite a bit of work around the corporate world, around strategy, marketing, sales, along those lines before getting into entrepreneurship and becoming a founder. What was the young version of Eric like, and what were you aspiring to do, and how did you end up landing in consulting and ultimately into sales, and strategy?
Sure. So I grew up in a small town where the small business owners there was no big business. And so you didn't have executives of Fortune 500 or even Fortune anything, you know, in town hanging out at the restaurants or whatnot. And so, the guys who were the successful businessmen were putting their shingles up on my little league field, right? And were coaches and Sunday school teachers and whatnot. And I just had an immense admiration for them. My dad was a doctor, but this is back in the era when doctors were actually solo practitioners, right? They were running their own small business as well. And I just really, I love the idea of somebody creating something, creating jobs, and having people think of being a successful small business owner as being independent. You're not independent. You're interdependent, but you have far more choices in terms of kind of how you're going to spend your time. And I want more people to have that opportunity. And so that's kind of how I grew up. You've seen some of my corporate stuff. What's not on there is the first entrepreneurial endeavor was right out of college, and it failed miserably. I recognized I had a whole hell of a lot to learn. And so I ended up going back to grad school. I went into the corporate world for a few years after grad school because it was a great way to go learn a ton about business in a real world setting, right? That was Deloitte, and going into back in the telco days with UNEP, telco startups, right? But those telco startups had to raise 100 million and, started with 1,000 people to make them work. And so I got to see that, got to see AT&T and wireless companies and whatnot. And after about 4 years of that, knew I didn't like the travel lifestyle. It's 50 weeks a year on the road, and went to, a broadband startup here in Austin, more established. They're about 5 years old, had a great opportunity to learn from them, and then had the opportunity to, kind of become the first employee at an identity protection company called CS Identity here in town. The four founders have been after it for about 18 months. They finally started raising some money, and I came in right when the kind of first $800,000 was raised, and got a chance to help grow that from, pretty much day one through to, I stayed there 6 years. About 4 years after I left, we did exit. And so that was successful. Had a chance to go to Shipping Easy, help grow that. Got to exit the same year as CS Identity did. And then back to the corporate world, because when we were acquired, Stamps.com bought Shipping Easy, was doing a roll up of a bunch of our competitors, and I went in and ran BD, and those guys took great care of me. I knew it wouldn't be my forever home. I would want to come do another startup, but I also wanted to make sure that the guys who spent a bunch of money to buy us got the value out of that. And so I had a great opportunity to work for them, spent 4 years doing that. And then it was while I was in stamps.com that I found the opportunity for Onramp. And it was like, look, this is perfect. I like working with e-commerce merchants. That's what Shipping Easy did. I'm staying in the same segment. I get to work alongside people I've known for a long time. And I get to go back to the early stage where I really like being.
Got it. Got it. Um, I mean, in the commerce space, there's a lot of, areas to play in. Why did you think about financing as the opportunity there? Financing operational expenses for the, operational costs for these commerce brands, to get kind of like their inventory in play.
Yeah. So inside the prior company, Shipping Easy and Stamps.com, we provided an order aggregation engine, right? It was a piece of SaaS software. You would log into our site and you would connect your Amazon, your Shopify, your Walmart, wherever you sold online. And now you had a single screen where you could see every order you have. Now, this sounds really simplistic today. In 2012, this didn't exist. And so that was really hard to see your orders across everywhere you sold. Um, we would then bring that in and we would connect to all the carriers so that on that same screen, then you could say, hey, great, this person's asked for overnight delivery. We would automatically tell you, great, here are the 3 overnight options. Heck, we'd even get to the point where you would just tell our system to pick. We would just optimize lowest price for the quality of service, everything else. And we could, if you wanted to trust us, we would just spit out the shipping labels. You wouldn't even have to log in. Right. So just trying to make that operational efficiency exist. But one of the challenges when you're shipping online is that there's a fraud problem in terms of, stealing, and postage, unbeknownst to most people, is currency under federal law. And so we would find people creating fake accounts to go generate postage labels that they would take to the post office and get the cash for. And so to stop that, you'd force people to then deposit money with a credit card. You would, do all the identity verification. And when their postage balance got low, they'd top up again. Well, if your postage balance gets empty and your credit card's maxed out, you can't top up. And we'd start to see customers who were like, why aren't you shipping? And we'd call them, say, hold on, we're seeing a problem here. And they tell us, like, I don't have any cash. I literally, my credit cards are maxed. I have no cash. I have no ability to get to any cash. And so I'm calling Amazon right now to cancel these orders. Well, Amazon hates that, right? So it actually becomes really bad for the seller. It's actually a reason you'll get kicked off the Amazon platform. The customer hates it. So if it was your Shopify site, well, now your customers are mad at you. You're getting bad reviews. On top of that, if it's a Shopify sale, you paid credit card fees to get the order, and now you're paying credit card fees to give the money back. And so all of those things create this, it really identified this working capital problem. So I really started digging into that, and it was like, look, this problem doesn't just impact your ability to ship the next order. It actually impacts your ability to make sure you have inventory in stock to generate the next order. And it impacts your ability to actually spend, the Google ad spend or Amazon advertising that you need to actually create that next order. And so the real opportunity kind of exposed itself in just looking at that challenge. And we supported hundreds of thousands of these merchants. And, there was a significant percentage where you were just seeing this problem. Maybe not every week for the same guy because he'd go out of business, but with enough recurrence, it became very clear that, these small business owners, their personal Amex, the 5 or 6 cards they can personally get against their personal borrowing capacity. As your business gets a little bit of traction, it's not enough. And it just seemed very clear to me that there'd be a really easy way to go look at the order data, the success of the business, looking at the same data I was using at Shipping Easy to create shipping labels, to be able to say, hold on, this is a good risk. This guy's got a consistent business. The bank can't see it, but I can. So let me go build a product that then solves that problem.
Interesting. And what is that? Can you go in a little deeper around that risk assessment and why, you could see it through Onramp and that becoming an opportunity versus a bank can't see it?
Well, the bank can't see it because they don't connect to the order sources.
Got it.
And 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 I don't want to beat up on anybody.
Sure.
Banks serve all businesses and all
Yep.
people.
Hmm.
And so when you have to be all things to everybody, you can't be perfect for one. And that's okay, right? We don't work with mechanics
Hmm.
right here at OnRamp. We don't work with restaurant owners. I don't work with dry cleaners. You have to sell online. You have to have a product that you're going to sell, right? Because then I can use the different online data feeds to get a perspective on your business that we've purpose built our software for.
Hmm.
And the banks just aren't going to do that. Now, 20 years from now, maybe they do that. Maybe they buy us and say, hey, this is the way we're going to go work with the e-commerce space. But today they don't. Um, and so with that, because we can see your order history, I don't just know the quantity of revenue you're generating. I get a perspective on the quality. And when we look at the risk of our customers, there's really two risks that we have. One is what we call the willingness to repay. They're just people who will borrow money from you that don't want to give it back, right? They're just trying to steal, unfortunately. And so we have to screen those people out. And then the other risk we take is the ability to repay. And that really actually comes down to, is the business strong enough that it's going to continue? Is it going to be a going concern? And actually, that's the risk that I'm very comfortable taking. And our policy is, if somebody borrows from us and we didn't spot that the business was struggling, and they were honest with us about the state of the business, which is an important caveat there. But then as the business goes down, as long as they're making the payments that are required through that process, I'm just not going to go chase after you, right? Like it's hard enough to build a business, and having tried put money into one and failed miserably. I know that pain, and I don't want to go add on to that pain. And so what we're really trying to do then is build an engine that can identify those problems, keep the bad people out, and then hopefully help the people that are in a solid enough position that we can. And then if their position begins to change over time, be able to alert them to that. Like, hey, we're seeing cracks in your business. If you can fix these things, you're going to be, you're going to have a better going concern. And if you can't, it looks like you're maybe not going to be in business. And because of the short-term nature of the e-commerce inventory turnover cycle, right, we don't have to go provide a year's worth of capital. E-commerce inventory turns over in 50 days.
Hmm.
And the supply chains have gotten much better. COVID really, took them for a ride, but they've tightened up again, which really means most businesses need somewhere between a 60 and kind of 120-day note that they're going to be paying back, and then just rinse and repeat that process, right? Kind of 3 to 6 times a year, which then means if the business is going down, there's an opportunity where we might be able to help kind of salvage that. But if we see it continue, like, we're probably not going to do the next note. But that business has got to, that owner's got a bigger problem to go solve anyway. But maybe we can help them on the way.
Hmm. Makes sense. Um, a couple of questions around that. So one is, first and foremost, I guess, would be like that level of depth and understanding around the risk, and perhaps the formula of how you guys assess the risk. How has that evolved from, you starting the business, identifying that this is like, a problem for a lot of these operators, but then being able to create the business model to make that offering, and then how has that changed or evolved in terms of making more. I imagine that you're constantly trying to de-risk the environment. So how does that change, or does it change at all?
Oh, it changes. In fact, right before this, I was meeting with the team. We're getting ready to go move from our 3.0 model to our 3.1.
Mm,
Look, when I first started doing this kind of 2019, 2020, I was doing it on a handshake and a guess, right? I mean,
yeah.
I had a developer friend who built me a harness that would allow me to, extract data from Amazon. And I had two friends who were Amazon sellers, and they were my pilot customers.
Mm,
Everything was on a handshake, right? It was really just kind of, could you prove the model out?
yeah.
When we launched officially as a business in 2021, then I think July was our first active month. We didn't have a risk model, but we had Experian data and LexisNexis, and we had a risk guy, and we were kind of doing our best. And we ran about our worst month, we had a 9% loss rate, but I think we averaged about 6% from July 21 to the end of September 22. October 22, we launched a proprietary risk scoring model, right? That's when we did our V1. Since there, we've, gone through probably 7 iterations, right? A bunch of, intermittent ones. And then, we went to 2 and 3, right? Which were big evolutionary or revolutionary leaps. And we're now kind of back into that evolutionary cycle in the threes now. What we're constantly doing is trying to assess within the data we have more data points that identify risk, and that data that we capture, right? It's order data, and so we're looking now like what's the size of your product catalog, and of your product catalog, how much revenue concentration is there within any 1 or 5 or 10 products, or you have a really nice distributed kind of mix of revenue across your catalog. We capture behavioral activities in terms of how, when you engage with Onramp, via mobile devices, desktop devices, things like that, and we're pulling all that together to then go build that risk profile. And we do that at sign up, but then we're doing that every night because we get fresh data in, right? Every day you're selling more, so we're pulling all that data and we're continually risk scoring, and then you're interacting with us, not every day, right? We're not an operational app where you're in our application every day, but there's a payment every, there might be a daily payment, weekly, or every other week payment. You're going to come in, check your balances probably once or twice a month. And so all those different kind of points of contact, right, come together to create a picture about the merchant, that we then use to update that risk model. So when the time comes for the next offer, it's instantaneous, right? We've actually really already scored a pool of offers. And so if you come in and say, look, this is how much I need, great. We already know we're going to say yes. Now, if you come in and say, hey, I need something different this time, well, then it's going to take us, I don't know, 30 seconds to get you an answer on that one. But what we're trying to do, right, is just be proactive so that, the goal is somebody could wake up in the morning, open their iPhone, say, I need cash, push the accept button, and go about their business.
Got it. Got it. And there's a few other players in this space. I know Big also is based in, well, they're Israeli-based company, but they have an office out in Austin as well.
Yep.
I mean, and there's been other players in space that have grown really fast and then failed as well. I think from like past 3-4 years ago, but
A Canadian group. Yep.
yeah, exactly. And I'm just kind of curious, around this space specifically, is all of that kind of on that that proprietary like risk algorithm in terms of like how the success of a company is in terms of the bets that you guys are taking and in terms of like making these notes?
Well, certainly the risk algorithm has an impact.
Yeah.
And to speak to some of the high flyers that then stumbled prior to 2022, the investment world was very much a growth at all costs.
Yeah.
And in a SaaS software solution, that can take you a long way because, a customer who doesn't pay you, your hosting cost was 10 cents for the month. Who cares, right? It doesn't have an economic impact. Well, not in, reasonable numbers. In a lending business, it has an enormous impact. And if what you're trying to do is grow, one of the things you can do to accelerate your growth is to accept higher risk customers.
Sure.
But if you're not priced appropriately, then you're going to have a problem in that the creditors and look, I've been a software startup guy since 2024 or 2004. I have not been a fintech lending guy until I started this. And one of the things I've learned in this is the credit side of the equation. We have to go raise credit dollars and equity dollars. The creditors always get paid. They're first in line. And if you're screwing that side of the business up, you're just not going to have a business. And so you can't afford to grow rapidly into bad debt. And if you've raised a bunch of equity, well, in fact, you can if you've raised a bunch of equity, but if you grow through that equity, then there's no value left in the business, and the equity investors aren't going to come back and give you more.
Yep.
And so I think, the challenge in the growth at all costs time is that it's probably not appropriate for a fintech or an alternative fintech lender, right? Other fintechs could do it, right? we started in 21, that kind of growth at all cost was there, but we only did a small convertible to go kind of take that next step. 2022, we did our seed round. The world was already changing. 2023, we did an A. We were definitively in that changed world at that point. And so we haven't grown up in a world where it was growth at all costs. And in fact, we've also grown up in a world where we weren't living in a zero interest rate world. We were already dealing with, climbing rates and the impact that was having on the macro conditions. And so our risk model didn't have to adapt to that big macro shift, 0% interest rates going to 5, right? That just didn't impact us. We started in there. And so our risk models have already adapted to that. In fact, if rates go back to 0, we might have a different problem, right? Which is we're not sure how to go underwrite to that. And we're probably saying no to people that we should be saying yes to. But that actually doesn't put you out of business, right? It just means you're growing slower. Maybe your investors aren't as happy, but at least they haven't taken the existential loss.
Yeah.
And so, I think, and then your other question around is everybody looking at the order data? I can't speak to all my competitors. It certainly looks like 8Fig does that. I think they have kind of a similar approach. There are a lot of working capital providers. I'd say there's 5 or 6 of us who are actually looking at this from this e-commerce data-rich environment and really thinking about it in that manner. Look, we think there's somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million e-commerce merchants in our, call it, $250,000 a year revenue to $10 million a year revenue size in the US that deploy about $200 billion a year in working capital just to move sales. And that is such an enormous market that there's a significant amount of room for a lot of us to be very successful, find our niche, and go help those merchants and to build a really successful and ongoing business.
Yeah. I know we're kind of rounding up on time here, but I have a few more questions. One is,
Sure.
we've spoken to a few other kind of like commerce experts, but on a flip side of things, which is like, more so on the software, the SaaS solutions around helping to operate e-commerce, particularly on Shopify, and then more focused around retention side of
Yep.
things with commerce. And one of the things that we were discussing was this idea of you have large commerce brands, and then you have a bunch of other types of brands that are trying to grow. The idea of like influencer brands or influencers creating their own brands nowadays, and seeing a bunch of more growing of these like micro brands. And I'm thinking of, are you noticing anything trending wise where it is much more harder to see these large brands take a large percentage of the market versus starting to see a lot more of these smaller brands kind of sprouting up? And obviously that leads to them more, I think, like volume of potential business, but is that a good or a net positive or a net negative perhaps for you guys, where you're maybe seeing like smaller brands, but a more higher volume of them existing?
Yeah, so we see the small brands, right? When you're willing to work with a customer who's got $3,000 in 3-day revenue,
Yeah,
you're talking to the smalls, right? Where now we're not the eBay seller who's selling last season's shoes,
yeah,
right? That's not a business, that's a hobby.
yeah,
I do think, and I haven't spent a lot of time researching this, but it's a project I want to undertake. I do think, and I gotta believe that e-commerce is probably going to be, if not the highest, it's got to be the top 5 in terms of the industry segment for new business creation, right?
mhm,
It is a
yeah,
great way to launch a business, right? For someone who's very resource constrained, who just does not have access to capital. And as far as the influencers, so I can speak to this. My wife is launching her own brand. Product called Nose Love. It's a balm for the inside of your nose for when it gets really dry out and whatnot. And she's been working with suppliers and kind of getting her supply chain built out. And what I've heard anecdotally from the suppliers is, people are getting calls from these influencers saying, "Hey, I want to launch my own lip balm." And
yeah,
and this guy's like, "Well, great. Tell me what you want to do." She's like, "Well, can you send me a sample of 200?" He's like, "Well, hold on. Just to set the equipment up, I'm not doing less than 10,000 units."
yeah,
Right. And so I think there are a lot of people in that influencer community who there's no cost of goods sold to be an influencer. But
Yeah.
when you're switching from, hey, I'm trying to get eyeballs and followers and I'm getting paid per the click, to now I actually have to go do something that's not bits, it's atoms. Atoms have a cost, right? There's
Yeah.
a cost of goods sold. There's an upfront investment to that. Um, and so I think a lot of those guys, it's easy to do with merch because you can do t-shirts and hats and just, you can drop ship that and just outsource the whole thing. But if you're actually going to develop a product, now you actually have to make an investment. And I think, a lot of those guys that start to think through that, when they start to dig in and make those phone calls, they're learning pretty quickly, oh, hold on, this is a different kind of investment. It's not the same business anymore, which is not to say that they shouldn't do it, right? It's just going to take a different mindset, and take some additional thought. It's you can't just jump into it like you could move from, say, YouTube to TikTok, right?
Sure.
Um, so, but from a look, the reason I like helping, the reason I started Onramp, and when I went to Shipping Easy after having been in enterprise sales software products, at Shipping Easy, we worked with e-commerce SMBs, and it was about 6 months in when we got a phone call from a pastor who told us, because of you guys, I can quit my day job. This guy was making organic deodorant at home. And, pastors they get paid by the church a little bit, but they really have to work a day job to feed the family. And he
Mhm.
quit his day job because his organic deodorant had taken off, and our software helped him run the operations of that business efficiently enough that he could then generate the sales that would pay him enough money that he could then live off of his own work. That was incredibly rewarding to hear that call, right? You're like, hold on, our software has made a difference in somebody's life. Whereas, when I was doing broadband software, kind of like, well, great, AT&T's earnings per share went up half a penny. Like,
Sure.
yay. You don't feel it in your soul the same way.
Yeah.
And so at OnRamp, that mission continues, right? I want to see more people launch businesses that become sustainable. And, my definition of sustainable is not somebody else's definition, right? And so they get to define what sustainable is. And some of them might say, hey, look, I need to be a $100 million a year business to achieve my goals. Well, great. I'm going to be here for a part of that path. And then some other financial provider is going to take my place because they're going to be helping you at a different stage in your business.
Mhm.
Somebody else might say, hey, I never want to get more than 2 million. I just want to be a solopreneur. Great. I might be your partner forever, right? It's not for me to decide where they want to end that journey. I just want to make sure that for those people in this stage of the journey, that they've got a great partner and they've got great tools to work with. And so I think, when I think about people launching e-commerce businesses, I just get really excited because I think the world is a better place the more interdependent small business owners that are running sustainable businesses that can continue to exist, right? If we can grow that number, we're making the world better for everybody.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. We can end it on that note. I think that was a great kind of like dive into that whole world.
Optimistic.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I want to say thank you so much for taking the time today, sharing your story, sharing, why you're so passionate about what you guys are doing on OnRamp, how you got to the idea, then building it out, and where you guys are today. And I just wish you nothing but more continued success.
Chris, thank you so much. I really appreciate being here today. And thank you for letting me share my story.
Of course.